Good morning and welcome to Ministry Shares Reimagined, What You Can Expect. I'm Jeff Bolt. I'm the Director of Advancement for the Christian Reformed Church in North America and U.S. And I'm here with Peter Algersma. He is the Director of Advancement in Canada. Today we're going to talk to you a little bit about Ministry Share Reimagined and the timeline to the pledging system for Ministry Shares. So let's take a quick look at an overview of today's webinar.
Thanks, Jeff. So our agenda for today, over the next 25 minutes, we want to take you through a brief overview of Ministry Shares, what they are and why they exist, a little bit of a summary of what we're going to do for the next few months up until July of 2021. And then we're going to go through our 6 key steps. We'll take some time and talk about those six key steps before we wrap up, and indicate an opportunity of where you can send any questions in that you might have for us. So let's talk a little bit about Ministry Shares. They've been a part of our denomination since 1862, and they are being reimagined. I'm sure you've heard, and I'm sure you've read some of that information, and today is the day that we wanted to remove some of the mystery around what the new rules, the new opportunities are surrounding Ministry Shares and those gifts. Let's spend a few minutes and remind ourselves about what this covenant relationship is all about. Jeff?
One of the important things to remember about Ministry Share Reimagined is Ministry Shares is a covenant among churches. This has not been something that is between the offices of the denomination and churches, but it's something that is between churches and other churches so that we can do ministry together. Peter?
And they allow every CRC member and every congregation to participate. Whether you're a thriving church with thousands of members, whether you're an emerging church, you have an opportunity to participate in this program that all churches are part of. The ministries also all give us an opportunity to participate in different ways.
And finally, all the ministries that we are funding through Ministry Shares were started by CRC churches, church members who said, we need to do something. One of the examples is Disability Concerns Ministry. It was an individual from a church in Muskegon that said, we need to have a ministry that supports those with disabilities. They took that to their church. The church took it to the classes. The classes overturned Synod, and ultimately Synod decided that this was very important to our denomination and set up the Office of Disability Concerns. These ministries were started by you. So let's take a look at what changes are going to be happening with Ministry Share Reimagined. First and foremost, the Ministry Share year, which was a calendar year, January through December, is going to get moved. It's going to move to a fiscal year starting in July and going then through June. Peter?
The second change is that we are no longer going to prescribe a per member allocation amount. So historically, there was a number that was provided depending on your specific region, that was the amount per member times the number of members in your congregation gave you the total amount that we were expecting from your congregation. We no longer have that.
So what we're going to do instead is ask every congregation to prayerfully consider a pledge amount that they feel that their church can support. This is a number that you're going to come up with, and you're going to say, hey, this is the ministry work that we want to do with other churches of our denomination.
And as each congregation does that, we've also noticed that in the past, some emerging churches were participating in that already. They were providing a gift to further those ministries that they saw value in, that they enjoyed being part of. So we want to encourage all emerging churches to also make that pledge. Now, that does not mean they have to make a pledge, but depending on their individual situation, they're encouraged to do that. Jeff?
And it's going to put churches first in the budgeting process. in the past, it has always been considered that churches were first, that the amount that you were going to give was specifically started with you. But over time, this kind of got lost. So we're bringing this back to a very strong position. You're going to start the process of the budget. By your pledge and doing your pledge first, we'll be able to set the budget based on what you're willing to give.
Now, there's also some things that aren't changing. One of the opportunities that we have to build on is the fact that ministry shares are one of the most efficient and cost-effective ways of bringing the dollars in to the denomination to administer all the programs. That cost-effectiveness will certainly continue.
We will also continue to support educational institutions. Calvin University was the only educational institution that was supported by ministry shares. This number was based on the number of students from a region in your classes or in your area. And then what we did is we encouraged you to also give to the other institutions that were closer to you by reducing how much you give to Calvin, but giving that remainder to your own college or educational institution.
So to that point, so we won't be issuing specific guidance for all educational institutions. We would encourage each church to continue to support their own local institutions with a similar amount as they did in previous years. And lastly, and I think most importantly, we commit to continue to be good stewards with the dollars that we've been entrusted with. That's something that each ministry director has brought to their programs historically and will continue to do so moving forward.
What about January 2021 through June 2021? We said earlier, we're going to move the ministry share year from calendar year to fiscal year. Well, this has to take place in January. So we're going to move, and what we want you to do is we want you to continue to support ministry shares in the original system from January 1 until June 30th. We will send you a letter, just like we've normally done in January, that tells you exactly how much we're asking you to contribute to ministry share. The key piece will be is that ask will only be for 6 months, and it'll be half of what is normally requested from each church. That's the change for January 1 through June 30th. It's important to remember this. We continue to need your support the first half of next year.
So let's start talking about the new process. So we've divided this new process into 6 key steps, which we'll take you through. Along the way, along each one of these steps, there's a few months between each step, but along the way, Jeff and I will keep communicating with you. So keep an eye open for those communications. And as I said earlier, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. So let's start with step number 1. We have an information package and guidance that's been distributed to each of the churches. That may or may not have been received quite yet, but check your mail and those should be coming in very shortly in terms of that information being received. And that will help you determine how to make your pledge. Now, many people have asked, how do we get started on this? How do you make a pledge in this new system? Do we start from a blank slate? How does that process begin? So one important thing to keep in mind is as you, the individual church, come up with that first pledge in this new system, is that the ministries that this process is funding, they already exist. They already have plans. They already have an estimation of what they expect to do this year. So any significant change will cause us to alter the scope of these ministries. So that's something that does need to be kept in mind.
So one of the first options for determining your pledge which Synod asked us to set up, is multiple options. One of them is to consider what you gave last year and increase it by 5%. 5% is kind of a random number, although it's not. 5% will allow ministries to continue to grow in their mission program. What you ask them to do always costs a little bit more, it seems like, each year. By adding 5% to what you did last year will allow you, and it will allow the ministries to continue doing ministry that they love.
The second option is to consider a percentage of your budget, a specific tithe. The option is to look at what percentage you remitted last year for ministry shares as a percentage of your budget and keep a similar number going forward. That allows for growth in your own congregation to ensure that the ministries that we are doing with you continue to grow as your own congregation grows. What is a fair and reasonable tithe? We leave that up to you to come up with, and I think that is going to be a very different number depending on the size and scope and involvement of your own church in your local community.
And finally, you can consider your own per member amount. We've always done a $346 amount over time. That was the last numbers, but this gives you an opportunity to set your own per member amount. You can make that decision and determine what you feel is reasonable and what you want to do in terms of participating in shared ministry.
So in August and September timeframe, we are formally asking church councils and congregations to determine their pledge amount. We've sent information, as we mentioned, about your 2 previous years of giving, which we hope will assist you in making that pledge process. As your church considers your own growth and your own local priorities, I just want to make sure that you are claiming some ownership in the amazing success that missionaries around the world are working with Resonate, that you've been funding. That radio ministry, that Back to God Ministries, is done in 9 languages around the world, is something that you claim as your own, and a desire to continue moving those ministries forward through your ministry share contribution.
You know, Peter, one of the things that I think is important to remember and is often forgotten or misunderstood is that ministry shares pay salaries. We hear that all the time. It's important to realize that only about 10% of a ministry share dollar goes towards administration for our denomination, that being Synod, COD, all the other parts of finance that take place. We maintain about a 10% number there. And in terms of comparison to any other nonprofit organization, that is a very good number.
Absolutely.
So some things to keep in mind as we continue to move forward and as you begin to make your pledge and decide on this. First, this is a pledge that is set up to start July 1 of 2021 and go through June 30 of 2022.
The other question that we received from some councils, and we wanted to address this as well, according to church order, councils are indeed allowed to make this decision on their own. If you wanted to look that up in a little bit more detail, you can have a look at Article 35 in church order.
Third thing to remember is this may cover 2 different budget years for your church. This may be unusual for you for the first time. Understand, this is not unusual for all churches. We have many churches that have fiscal years and calendar years. We're moving the budget year. We're moving ministry shares to a fiscal year. This may change within your congregation, but it's not changing for everybody.
And lastly, this does not include classes funding. So this change that we're making at the denominational level does not necessarily impact the way that classes collect their ministry shares or their funding. So keep your local classes in conversation. They may make some change, but this does not suggest that any changes is happening at the same time.
So now we get to the fall classes meeting. You as a church have made your pledge amongst yourselves, and now we need to move to the classes meeting that's going to occur the end of September, October, and even some classes go into early November. What's going to happen when I bring my pledge to classes?
In many ways, that's a decision that each individual classes can decide how that conversation takes place. That depth of discussion, the simplicity of the discussion is truly up to them. But I hope that there is an engagement, that there is an opportunity to understand the big picture of what the individual local churches are doing together as part of that classes. We've provided a form, which we'll talk about later, that each classes can complete, and that form includes the total amount that churches have contributed last year and the total pledge that they're making this year. We would encourage classes to be aware of the difference between those two numbers. So if last year's pledge was a certain level and this year's pledge is less than half of last year's pledge, that number, that message is something that classes needs to be comfortable with in terms of what message is that sending to the denomination. As Jeff mentioned earlier, one option is to pledge a tithe of your budget. One option is to pledge 5% more than last year. How do those things translate in terms of the total classes number? I just encourage classes to have that conversation with local churches and ensure that there's a comfort level as that number is sent forward to the denomination.
Peter, I think it's also important here, because we've talked about it before, we do not want this to be a policing situation. We're not asking classes to police what churches are pledging or how much of their pledge in the future has come in versus how much they have pledged for. This is a conversation about doing ministry, shared ministry together, and why it's so important to do shared ministry. But we do not want this to become a blame game. It's important that we look at this from a holistic perspective of how are we going to do more ministry together.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Jeff.
And finally, in January, well, not finally, but the pledges will be all brought in by January 31. The denominational offices have this date set because we need to build a budget. And so by January 31, all the classes should have met. The pledges should have been received to the treasurers, and the treasurers will be able to submit all of those pledges to the denominational offices. That's the final date for that. There will be opportunities to make changes throughout. That's fine. If for some reason you discover that you need to make a change, or you feel that maybe we were a little lower on our budget expectations and we can pledge a little bit more, those changes can be made throughout the year and even in this point. But by January 31, those are the harder numbers that we're going to start using to create a budget. So what will happen from this point? We'll create a budget based on three things. We're going to create a budget based on ministry share pledges. We're going to look at what typically comes in from church offerings, because churches take offerings for all of the agencies in the ministries, and also individual donors. We receive a significant amount of money from individuals as well, and we can make those estimates and determine what that's going to be. We're going to create a budget based on these three areas of income.
And Jeff, I think it's worth highlighting as you talk about church offerings as one of those other sources of revenues. I know that many churches who have a second offering regularly engage with some ministries such as chaplaincy or faith formation ministries or back to God ministries. And our budgets rely extensively on these churches who have that relationship and that willingness to support. So as we reimagine ministry shares and as the pledging process changes, I just want to highlight that the need for these ministries to get that support from church offerings does not change. So I wanted to clarify that.
Peter, what happens if my church doesn't take a second offering? Because I know that's a question that's coming around out there. Our church doesn't take a second offering. What do we do then? Or what can we do?
In a case like that, I know that there are some churches that have a base amount in their budget that they plan to share with some key ministries. So there's the opportunity for a flat $1,000 or $5,000 or $200 to be allocated from the overall budget to be oriented to ministries that there's a great partnership of. I would encourage those churches who don't have that opportunity for a second offering to find creative ways to encourage individuals to participate in those ministries, in particular those ministries that have a great relationship with your church. If you're using Dwell curriculum, it would be a wonderful opportunity to provide some support to faith formation ministries, the creators of Dwell curriculum. So then we get to May of 2021, and the Council of Delegates, as well as both the Canadian and Michigan corporations, will review their respective budgets and approve any changes to any programs and personnel for that ministry year that begins in July of 2021. And that's where the fun begins in that way.
And here's the big question that we have heard time and time again. What if churches pledge significantly less than what they currently give to ministry shares? Are we going to go back to the old system? Is what I hear. No, is the answer. It is not going to go back. We are going to stay with this. And if the pledges do come in lower, there are directions, there's process, there's procedure that we can follow to make that work. We will then have to cut ministry. You've said in the past, Peter, through this conversation that we're having, these are ministries that exist today. We are doing all of these ministries already. This is not something about, hey, we're going to create all of this new ministry with your giving. We already do these ministries for you. We will have to make cuts if ministry shares do not come in close to where we are today or better. There's a process for that, and we can make personnel cuts, we can make programming cuts, and all of that will take place.
It won't be an enjoyable process, but it is a process that we will go through. I want to highlight that link that I think we mentioned earlier as well, that this is, these ministries are for the local churches, are being done at the request of the local churches. And if the local churches do not want to fund it to the level that is required, we will spend the appropriate amount of money that the churches are offering to conduct these ministries. That's where our next step is.
Yep. And that leads us to our actual final step. July 2021, July 1 of 2021, we'll start the new ministry share pledging system budget. And the whole process will start over. We're going to go right back to where we were. We're going to send you information. We'll start sending you information again because the whole pledging process will have to start over. But July 1 of 2021 is when we'll start this new reimagined ministry share year. So let's look at some conclusions. We've gone through a lot of information, 6 big steps that we have to follow to get to this point. And I think there are some people out there, there's some churches out there that are really struggling with this whole process. And what I want to say first off is the first time is always the hardest and the most difficult time. We will work through this. If you have questions, email us, call us, talk to us. We will work with you and help you through the first time through. We'll help you through every time through. We're here to help. This is always a messy time, the first time, but we're going to make it work. Peter?
The other part to that is remember that the first half of 2021 is on the original system. What matches with that too, and a couple of conversations that I had this week, we're in an interesting time right now, from churches trying to figure out their own budgets and how much money is available, and to try to make a pledge at this time is difficult. It's awkward. But do remember that the pledge you're making is beginning in July of 2021 through to the following June. So that's a little bit of a ways away. We're going to have some stability prior to that. And as Jeff mentioned as well, while the initial pledge has its due date, there is an opportunity to revise that process, that number, as you learn more between now and January.
And finally, churches are now at the beginning rather than the end. We're asking churches to start this process. We're saying, you tell us how much shared ministry you want to do, and we're going to build a budget based on that. It's important to understand, churches are first. We've always had churches first in our denomination. This reinforces that and really puts churches at the forefront of ministry shares.
Now, where can you go to get some more information? We've got some great resources online for you. So at crcna/ministry shares, there's some infographics. There's the annual ministry report indicating where ministry share dollars are spent. Bulletin inserts. There's some videos that you can share with your congregation just to root them in the what and the why we're doing this. And lastly, you've got both my email and Jeff's email address. Feel free to reach out if there's anything that we can do to facilitate, to answer questions. We are here for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to us and hear us out. We're praying for each church as we go forward. We know that this is a tough time, not only because we have to make decisions like this, but this pandemic of coronavirus has been a challenge for all of us. And we continue to pray for each other and understand that being a part of a denomination and being shared in ministry allows us to pray for each other and work with each other and help each other. So thank you. Have a great rest of the day. And again, as Peter has said, please get in touch with us if you have questions. We would love to help you work through this in any way that we can possibly do that. Thanks, and have a great day.